all of that is like leading to stress, then really kind of dialing that back and figuring out feels good for you, what feels right for you. I think a big piece is learning to listen to yourself and your intuition on what is right for you and not being distracted by what is right for everyone else or what everyone else thinks might be right for you.
Stress is the inflammation that robs us of life, energy, and happiness. Our typical solutions for gut health and hormone balance have let a lot of us down. We're over-medicated and underserved. At The Less Stressed Life, we're a community of health-savvy women exploring solutions outside of our traditional Western medicine toolbox and training to raise the bar and change our stories. Each week, our hope is that you leave our sessions inspired to learn, grow, and share these stories to raise the bar in your life and home. This episode is sponsored by Full Well Prenatal Multivitamin, formerly known as Full Circle Prenatal. Full Well Prenatal is the only prenatal multivitamin on the market with optimum nutrients for before, during, and after pregnancy. Use the code LESSSTRESSED to get a discount at fullwellfertility.com. Okay, today we're with Allison Schaaf, who is the founder of Miscarriage Hope Desk, a friendly resource she wished she'd had during her year-long struggle with infertility, including a total of 5 miscarriages. You might know Allison as the founder of Prep Dish, which was started about a decade ago. I think in my brain of it as kind of the OG meal planning service. It was very like household name-ish to me as a dietitian at one point. And so you may know her from that. And this is her more recent venture, which is Miscarriage Hope Desk. She lives in Dripping Springs, Texas with her husband, 2 sons, 2 cats, 2 puppies, a goat, lots of chickens, and a few beehives. And if you hear any chicks chirping in the background, it's not you, it's her. She actually has chicks in the background. So we'll just get that out of the way just in case anyone's wondering. Welcome.
Thank you. And I want to clarify, Prep Dish is very much still alive and running, yes, even though that's not what we're focusing our conversation on today. So.
Yes, very much alive and well if you ever don't know the answer of what is for dinner. So exactly. She answers that question. That is what she does over there. On that note, it's a lot to like create a baby, birth a baby like that, like Prep Dish. That was about a decade ago. And we're going to talk about your story, which led you to creating Miscarriage Hope Desk, which is this resource that didn't really, obviously there's a gap and you saw like, oh, there is nothing to help people here. How does your story fit into that business creation at that time? Take us back to when this was and when it started and how long, like how many years was this journey, if you want to start there?
Yeah. So to tie it together to that, I started Prep Dish. I was single and had just moved to Texas, and really I had a personal chef business as well. So I was like seeing personal chef clients and then like kind of hustling and creating Prep Dish on the nights and weekends. And part of the reason though behind creating Prep Dish was I knew that the personal chef business was not the business model that I wanted for a family. So even back then, it was kind of late 20s, I knew I wanted a family, and I knew when I had that family that I, wanted to be able to spend time with them that I didn't think the personal chef business was going to allow and the way I had it set up. So that kind of sets the stage. And then as I was building Prep Dish, met my, now husband, and we both knew that we wanted to start a family. And then, so after we got married, we kind of had a fun little turn of events where we moved to Puerto Rico for a year. And the thing to note there in terms of fertility is that at the time, Puerto Rico had this weird thing called Zika virus. So we've kind of had this like following of weird viruses, but only impacts women trying to get pregnant. So when we moved back to Texas, we then started our fertility journey and had no reason to think that I would have any sort of trouble. I don't think most women or couples do. I'm a dietitian by background. I eat healthy. I have an active lifestyle. My husband is he's active and healthy as well. We just kind of thought, the biggest decision we needed to make was how many kids do we want? And that was all we had to think about. But pretty quick into our journey, we realized there were other decisions and things to think about. So we started trying, as we were moving back to Texas, and like pretty quickly into it with the first pregnancy. I actually didn't even realize I was pregnant. And because I thought I had a period, I was already tracking all of that pretty closely. But then 2 weeks after what I thought was my period, I had a very large gush of blood leave my body and got rushed to urgent care and then on to an ER where everyone was telling me I was pregnant and asking for details about my pregnancy, which, I didn't know anything about. And kind of long story short there, had a very traumatic day of finding out I was 6 weeks pregnant, but also in the same kind of hour finding out that I had miscarried, which was like very kind of confusing since I didn't even realize that I was. But, after that, met with my doctor. They said, it's pretty normal to 1 in 4 pregnancies and a miscarriage. So I kind of got acquainted with that stat and really didn't have any reason to believe that I needed to be cautious in terms of moving forward and trying again. So that's what I did. We started trying again. Within a few months, I was pregnant again. And this time got the positive pregnancy test, was super excited. And a few weeks later, I started bleeding and sure enough, miscarried again. It was at this point where I realized there might be something going on here. I requested for my doctor that I get some testing done. I did find out I had a blood clotting issue, but that sounded like good news. A lot of times in the fertility world, women don't get any sort of kind of answers. And I felt like I had an answer and then a protocol that followed. And it was kind of a few months to get all that testing done and kind of reset. And then we started trying again to get pregnant, except for I had this protocol. So I thought everything was going to be great. And unfortunately, again, got pregnant pretty quickly, had this protocol of blood thinners. And this pregnancy, things went on really for quite a while. I was super sick. I was throwing up all the time. It was awful, but it was also great because everyone says, even my doctor, hey, morning sickness is a sign of a healthy pregnancy. And I'd had a few scans. I think it was the 11-week scan or 10 and a half weeks, somewhere around there. I had no reason to believe anything was going to be wrong. I had thrown up the night before, which I thought was just the telltale sign of a healthy pregnancy. But unfortunately, at that point, there was no heartbeat. And that was definitely one of the most devastating days of my life. And was really hard. And it was at that point, I was 3 times, I couldn't even wrap my head around it, what was happening. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be able to, I guess in the moment, move forward at all, but move forward with pregnancies and trying and doing all of that. I just felt very, devastated and crushed. And it was just this downward spiral feeling. I didn't know what to do. And it was kind of in the weeks preceding that I didn't think, I kind of started to feel like I can't move forward in doing this. I keep doing the same thing. I also started to get more and more acquainted with that recurrent pregnancy loss and recurring miscarriage kind of world and realizing there were women out there that went through this, unfortunately, even though I didn't personally know anyone who had gone through more than one miscarriage. I also, in this time, it was kind of this coincidence or probably not, but we had a trip planned for right after that miscarriage. And I took that trip with my husband and kind of on that trip got this kind of knowing. I hit rock bottom and I got then this knowing of adoption, and that started coming to me. So, over the next few months, really continued to hear the word adoption when I got quiet, when I meditated, when I prayed, any of that. I felt like kind of God was speaking directly to me. And, eventually we decided to go down that path. Although within that time frame, I did get pregnant again and miscarried for the 4th time, which just kind of reconfirmed that okay, I'm on the right path with this adoption thing. I've got to stop doing this thing. I've got to pause from that and kind of shift. And then, but knowing that I might get back to that eventually, but I just felt like I needed to give myself and my body a break. And the adoption process went actually really smoothly for us. I know that's not the case for everyone. And then a week or 2 after we had been approved, we hadn't even gotten to sign up for the agency we wanted to go with, but we got a call that there was a baby that had already been born. Within 2 hours, I was holding him in my arms. He was born around Christmas time, which is funny because I'd always said, as soon as we went down the adoption path, I was it's going to happen fast. And I think we're going to get a Christmas baby, which no one in the adoption world would say it was possible because that was, we started the process in October. So no one would have said, hey, you're going to have a baby by December. That just doesn't happen. But when we got this, our son, I was asking, it's a closed adoption. So I was asking the nurse some details. And when I actually realized, I was like, wait, how far along was the mom in her pregnancy? And they said, oh, she was 38 and a half weeks. And I did the math and realized that with that pregnancy that I'd had gone, kind of to 10 and a half weeks, I would have been 38 and a half weeks pregnant. And so, I already knew this was our baby, but it was in that moment that I just lost it. And I was like, oh my God, this is my baby that I was, crying for and praying for all those weeks when I was pregnant. And it just was one of the most magical days of my life. And, not to then be a downer from there, but I do like to share that right after we adopted, I got pregnant for a 5th time. And of course, everyone will tell you as soon as you adopt, oh, it'll just happen. It'll be so easy. And, unfortunately, that wasn't the case for us. I thought for a minute that might be, we started our protocol and all that, but that was miscarriage number 5. So at that point, I did, take a break, enjoyed the baby phase. And then we started interviewing fertility clinics, had a round of, IVF where we ended up with no viable embryos, much to the shock of the doctor and of course us, especially, since I had always gotten pregnant fairly easily. So that was also very devastating because I thought, with IVF, we could have options. If we had embryos, we'd have options of, me carrying or a surrogate or just, it would open up the doors. But that did not pan out. And so then took a step back, decided we would really kind of buckle down and figure out maybe if we need to change the protocol, but take a few months to really work on everything like health, nutrition, stress, all of that. And within that time frame, a month or 2 after that failed cycle, I got pregnant, and this time it stuck. And it's one of those things where, I was doing the protocol I'd been doing for a few pregnancies. I was doing this. I don't know what I was doing differently that was the magic thing. I don't think there was. It was just our time. And then, of course, a month after I got pregnant, the pandemic hit. So I had an interesting, pregnancy, and it was filled with, oh gosh, there were a lot of kind of interesting things that happened, but ultimately it was a healthy, full-term baby boy. And I now have 2 little ones. The baby's almost a year and a 2.5-year-old. And through all of that, one thing that my husband and I always came back to was, one, I just the idea of having multiple miscarriages hadn't even crossed my mind. I didn't know that was something that was in the realm of possibilities. And once we got into that, I feel like there just weren't resources out there to really explain what was going on, what options I had. The doctors kind of just funneled me down this path, but I never quite felt satisfied with what I was getting. And so I knew kind of halfway through the journey, there is a gap here and I am going to work to create something. And so it was interesting. I actually formed Miscarriage Hope Desk right before I got pregnant with my son and ended up creating that business as that pregnancy unfolded, which, wasn't my idea of timing, but I think, that was kind of meant to be that way. And Miscarriage Hope Desk launched a few months before my son was born. And then now we've just been, working to get those, connections and resources out to women that are struggling with recurrent loss and multiple miscarriages.
Oh, that is a lot of a story. And it's captivating the entire time. I didn't want to interrupt you. What year did that start? Sort of, kind of when was Zika virus, do we think? Are we at about 6 years ago, 7?
No, it was actually kind of condensed because I did get pregnant so quickly. So I want to say it started 2017 or 2016. Yeah.
Okay. And then your first baby was born. What year was that?
2019.
Okay.
No, 2018. He was right before the year. So I always want to say 2019 because it was a few days before the year.
Yeah. And this baby was born in 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. There was a lot that happened shockingly quickly right there. Wasn't there?
Yeah, really a lot. And not that I planned any of it, but that's one of the messages sometimes that I have for women is to really, and it's not like I was pushing or anything, but, really taking that time and space to allow, grief and not feel, and so I'm right now 39 years old. So I was in my late 30s through all of that. So I did kind of feel a time pressure, but I think that was a little bit unnecessary, right? I think sometimes looking back, like I think for me, just taking the time and space I needed to like grieve and get through everything and not trying to rush the next step, which is hard to do. Like it's hard to do when you feel this kind of pressure. And, I think also like you have a miscarriage and you want to get pregnant again to help make it better, but you also have to get through the grief. And, there were a lot of therapy appointments mixed in there. But, also it's work that I continue to do to this day in terms of kind of processing everything that happened.
Right. There's a lot of pieces there. And we were kind of talking before we got into this discussion. How do we want to, what do we want to help with today? How do we want to share and how do we want to help people? And we kind of settled on, and I have a couple more, I have questions that come up when we talk about this, but you kind of put it into buckets a little bit. Like these are the considerations for healing after miscarriage: emotional, physical, relationships, your marriage and relationship, especially testing and lab work, and then whatever else there is, whatever other ancillary stuff. So I don't know if we want to step through each piece of those, but if I may ask you, I think the emotional and relationships will be good to stuff to talk about. We'll start with the science stuff.
Okay.
Because it's a bit more maybe neutral-ish, maybe not to start. And that's where my first questions go. This went overall, there was a lot that happened in a short amount of time, even though maybe it felt like a long time. I would presume it also did. It was probably both of those things. What was the blood clotting disorder that you had, first of all? And was there standard testing that they were looking at with miscarriage history, like progesterone, or were there typical things that you did first? What was the standard of care that you received? And then the other thing I heard from you is that sometimes you're kind of lost in the shuffle after a certain point, right?
Yeah. So first, the blood clot disorder is antiphospholipid syndrome, which is pretty rare. Although if you have had recurrent miscarriage, it's actually common. I can't remember the percent off the top of my head, but it's a fairly large percent of women in this small percent of women, if that makes sense. So it is one that is typically tested for. A lot of times the standard of care, and this is shifting in the US, it's shifting from 3 miscarriages to 2. And it also, I think my doctor was okay with it because of my age. Unfortunately, honestly, I think after 2, it's okay to start doing some testing. And that is a huge thing that I have been an advocate for with Miscarriage Hope Desk, is I have a free checklist that I give out, hey, here is an extensive list of all of the lab work that you might want to look into. Not to be overwhelming, because there might be pieces in there that aren't relevant for you, but I think you need to take control of your labs, understand what the testing means. And then, if there are labs that your doctor chooses to skip, why is that and what's the reasoning for that? And not being afraid to ask for things, because it is easy to miss key pieces to that. And there was one that I didn't even mention, and any of them were kind of key pieces for me, were top articles. So with Miscarriage Hope Desk, we go in depth into the research. So any of them that I talk about here are probably ones that we have articles with really in depth research into them. But one of them was sperm DNA fragmentation. And that's one that until we got to that fertility clinic, no one had tested. And it's not as well accepted by everyone, but there is a lot of research that it can lead to miscarriage. So that's something. And overall, the male factor that goes into miscarriage is overlooked, because even I've had doctors say, well, you're getting pregnant, so your husband, must be fine. We don't need to do any testing on him. And the more I have looked into the research, and having a background as a dietitian has really helped me to know how to read through the research and look at the studies and see what's out there. But male factor can definitely contribute to miscarriage. So I think that's something that gets overlooked as well. But as you mentioned, yes, it's important to do the testing. I think knowledge is always good to have the knowledge. But then, there is this piece of it where you're not going to know with 100% certainty, what was the thing that helped. I have tweaked my supplement routine and my diet. But then, at the same time, I think one of the most important things is to really decrease your stress. And so if all of that is leading to stress, then really kind of dialing that back and figuring out, what feels good for you, what feels right for you. I think a big piece is learning to listen to yourself and your intuition on what is right for you, and not being distracted by what is right for everyone else or what everyone else thinks might be right for you.
And to talk about the stress thing, because people say that and they're like, that sounds nice, but sometimes we're not even self-aware of our own stress. And we've both been in that situation. Sometimes I have these physiological signs, the eye twitch or something, where I'm like, WTF. I literally talk about this all the time. Why am I experiencing this magnesium loss or whatnot? But with stress, Things that get suppressed would include progesterone, which I don't know what the percentage is of women carrying that need to be on progesterone, but it's pretty common to be on progesterone to maintain a pregnancy. And so stress will suppress that. Oh, thyroid. It'll totally steal from thyroid. And when thyroid is off, it's kind of like your metabolic center. And so like our body is so good at maintaining things, and then it has to steal from each other a little bit when it cannot, when it doesn't have enough resources, unfortunately. So, and like, this is the story that we hear that's common. It's like you're a high performing, successful woman with a healthy diet and lifestyle. Yet we still have some stuff going on, right? That you didn't know about, that you learned about, some things that you learned about, maybe some things that you still possibly haven't learned about because it was probably a bit of a whirlwind, right? It kept coming and then it kept, so it was like almost hard to grieve and do the things in between, right? And you allowed, like, it sounds like you did give yourself some space sometimes, which was awesome. So testing lab work, I know you have like a checklist and it does include some thyroid markers. And as a comment, I don't know what your experience was then moving toward the fertility realm, but it's not standard of care to do a full thyroid panel. It's just, we do a very partial one. And so you gave some really great advice and it was really take control of your labs. Like, why are you skipping this? And what's the reasoning for that? Right. So when you just ask that kindly, sometimes it changes the table and then they're like, okay, I'll add it. It's just like, it's not under the standard. So
I just think a thyroid is a really important one to point out. And it is one where there's sometimes a lack of questioning, like, oh, what was actually tested there? And it can change, right? So like if your thyroid was normal, but you've had a few miscarriages, it should be retested just to make sure things are still okay, because things can change over time with some of these.
Okay. So another one of the buckets besides testing the lab work is the physical healing. So it's kind of like this, it's a similar bucket to like testing and lab work, like physical healing post miscarriage. One, you had some major emotional stuff, right? But like physically, how did you feel? What was being depleted? How long did it take you to recover? Like, what would you say about the physical healing aspect? Like, what all goes into that?
Yeah, I mean, time, right? I think with all of it, it's time and just allowing yourself to take a break. I hear these heartbreaking stories of women like showing up at work the next day or like being at work, going actively through a miscarriage and like do it, you know what I mean? And so if at all possible, like be able to pause and that's where I am grateful that like I had Prep-Dish and my team was very understanding of like, I could do that for the most part, like I could take a pause and really immediately the first few days, like spend some time in bed and resting, crying a lot. I think that crying really does help physically heal as well. It's good for the emotional piece and the physical piece. Like that's just an important part of like over kind of getting through all of it. It's to just let those tears flow. And then, diet, I think really making sure I ate liver, liverwurst. So US Wellness Meats make this like liver that's like palatable, but for me, because there is a lot of blood loss. So things like liver. And then, gosh, I remember with one of them kind of listening to what your body craves as well. But like, I would do, what was it? Like avocado chocolate smoothie. It was like cold with like avocado and something else and cocoa. It was kind of like a smoothie, but it was almost like a milkshake. And it just really was felt very nourishing at the time. So listening to my body in that way. And then, just not overdoing it. I really did scale back through this whole time. I scaled back on working out. My workouts were really moving my body, but more going for a walk, not doing a HIIT workout, right? Really listening in and being that doesn't really sound like that's probably a good idea. And I don't feel like it. So I'm just going to go for a long walk outside or go, kind of be in nature and sit with the, I have a backyard that's full of trees and we have a swing that's in the trees. I'm going to go hang out there and just kind of listening in there. And like I said, with that one miscarriage, I did have a vacation planned immediately after. And that was so important to kind of give me that time and space. And again, I didn't plan it that way, but I think it probably wasn't an accident that happened. But I think if you can just take a vacation of some sort and just kind of take a break from it and not try to push through and to just kind of tune into your body to get quiet, with the adoption thing, right? When I heard that, that's because I physically was still and quiet and was meditating, or when I got in the car for a long drive, that's when I'd also hear it. You have to create that space. And for me, I had to be very intentional because it was really easy for me to want to be okay, I'm just going to get busy, going to do some work, but that's not going to get you what you want in the long run. So really fight that urge to do the busy work and to really just kind of sit with the feelings and just do the hard work, you know?
This is some good advice. I'm making some good recap notes here. It sounds like, and you can correct me, it does sound a little bit like you had a good relationship with your body maybe before this, because for you to say, I could scale back because I didn't feel good to overwork myself or whatnot, not everyone is in that place or in that space yet, right? And so I think it's okay to acknowledge that I think that's awesome for you. And if someone listening to this, if that kind of makes them bristle or they don't see themselves doing that, like maybe just ask why, like what narrative is going on there. So.
And one thing I will point out there, and again, like, and I don't know all of the, and sometimes it's easier in retrospect to like say that there were definitely points. And I think when I was going the adoption route, this came up and through subsequent therapy of like really being upset with my body and angry at my body. And that took a long time to process. But I think if someone has gone through miscarriage, that's an important piece to address and really tap into. Because if you would have asked me in the moment, I may not have like recognized that. But looking back, I can see that like I definitely like, you know, was disappointed in myself and my body. And that's not fair. And that shouldn't be the way that you think. And I don't want people to think that. But if that's in there, just know that that's unfortunately probably normal. But it's something to listen into and to work through.
Well, it overlaps. None of these buckets are in their silos. So we talked a little bit about testing and lab work. Now we were talking about physical healing, but it's spilling over into emotional healing. And so to be angry with your body is like a grieving process, right? It's like anger, denial, whatever the stages are, right? It doesn't matter the stages are, but like what you said there is valuable because you did have therapy. You were getting help and support there. You were not completely like you were capable of getting quiet and listening and not just filling and trying to be busy and shove it for a long time and house trauma forever, which is fully a thing that we see later in practice manifesting as challenging for adrenals, et cetera. But you got some support in that area. And I don't know how quickly you got support in that area, but I will say, like, as someone who sees clients, I have seen such a dramatic difference in people that are getting emotional support and those that are not, because those who are not dump it on my doorstep. And it's like really hard to sift through to get to like what I need to get to. Like, it's like hoarding. It's like, I now have to walk over all this stuff to get to where I need to get to, but that's actually not being addressed either. So now we actually can't be as effective. I feel like I can't even get to my job, you know, because like someone wants me to be their therapist, which I'm 1,000% unqualified for. So how quickly did you rise to the occasion and get emotional support? Because this was happening kind of quickly, maybe not, maybe was, right? Like in the it's easier to say in retrospect. What did you do for emotional healing first? And where did this come in? Like, what were some of the tools in the toolbox there?
Yeah. So therapy, looking back, honestly, I could have even done more than I did. Like after the first miscarriage, I think I did 1 or 2 sessions. After the second, I don't know that I did. And this is a topic for, again, they're all overlap, but we saw one together. So my husband and I saw a therapist together. And I think also because like there's this weird thing where, you know, if you're hurting, it's just like intertwined with your partner. And so I think, I don't know, like we end up doing a lot of kind of therapy together and that was super helpful. Like I can't recommend that enough because it's a lot to go through on a marriage. So we did that. And then, gosh, you know, there were periods where I wasn't regularly seeing one and maybe could have been, but I also like did different, and I'm one of those people that tries everything. And I don't want to list everything I've tried because it can sound overwhelming. I will say it's kind of one at a time. And like I said earlier, like picking and choosing what feels right for you in the moment. And also like, if it makes you a happier, healthier person, then do that thing. Because even if it doesn't lead to that pregnancy, if it's making you happier and healthier, then that's the thing you should be doing more of. And it'll make you a better, you know, parent someday, a better person. So, you know, some examples is in the beginning, there was an acupuncturist that wasn't the case. And then I did find an acupuncturist that I love. One of the differences is she came to my house. And so I didn't have to drive for the appointment because I'm in the country. And that meant that then all of a sudden the acupuncture appointment went from being stressful to being something where I felt very supported and cared for. So I'm really kind of paying attention to that. And then one thing that I've been doing even recently in terms of therapy is I've just started trying EMDR therapy. And it's specifically for anyone has had something that's traumatic, and a miscarriage can certainly be traumatic. And I'm a few sessions in. I don't feel like I'm fully in it enough to be like, this is the thing you should all do. But if you feel like you've gone through something in your fertility journey that is highly charged emotionally and it feels kind of traumatic, then you might want to look into EMDR. So far, I've been really pleased with the results of that. In the past, it's been mainly, couples therapy and then just individual one-on-one, like a talk therapy type thing, which have both also been very helpful. Gosh. Oh, and the other big piece for me was during my pregnancy, having a therapist, and that I had weekly. That was during COVID. So it was like, I think it might have even been BetterHelp, but it was like online therapist once a week. Maybe at one point it's even twice a week, but like getting through a pregnancy when you've been through that much loss is really hard. And I wanted to enjoy the pregnancy, but I had to be very intentional and really choose to enjoy the pregnancy and not have it be only filled with fear. So, the therapist almost was more instrumental, like while I was pregnant, I think, because it's like I had to like have some hand holding there.
Oh, it's such a good point. I love how you brought up like doing it during pregnancy, which is you would think not like that's not what makes sense normally to us. And actually, as you said, you got pregnant during COVID. Like there was a lot of fear instilled in people, especially around pregnancy. Like everything was unknown, which doesn't make anyone feel better. So, and then like, let's like make this pregnancy prenatal experience like a lot less enjoyable, a lot less enjoyable than it could be. At least you had some experience with it before. I suppose you could have some comparison. I don't know if it's better to have a comparison or not.
Well, I was severely sick again. So I was in bed throwing up nonstop. So by the time COVID hit and everyone was complaining about staying at home, I was like, I haven't left my bed in 3 weeks. So it was like, it was easy for me to stay at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, with this emotional healing, actually something before I transition here, you talked about different modalities. And I think like doing a big thing, is cool. Or you talked about lots of little things, like 1, maybe even 2 times per week. What about daily from a perspective of emotional healing? And you may have brought that up before, but like, what are you doing every single day that supports emotional healing? What sticks out to you that you think, or do you think therapy helped hold you over till the next time? Because it was like what you were like carrying out in your day-to-day life.
No, I think day to day, it's really important to like, again, that space, like not feeling the space with busy work. And I think it's kind of been a lesson for me in general, like going through this of like, okay, my walks to me are very important. I go on a walk every day. I try not to have anything in my ears, like it's like easy because you can fill your like quiet downtime with like, oh, I'm going to listen to I love podcasts. I'm on one right now, but having some time where you just go on a walk in silence. Journaling. I've seen some really cool journals now with Miscarriage Hope Desk. People will send, things that they create. And like, there's some really cool journals that like have guided prompts and stuff. I think just writing that out. So this is a piece I didn't have, but connection with other women that have gone through it. That's something I'm trying to create through Miscarriage Hope Desk, but being able to just, talk with women. And I did have 1 or 2 girlfriends with fertility struggles. And so, we could bond over that. And I think that was helpful. But yeah, on a daily basis, just like, I'm a meditator as well. So like meditation and my daily walk and just kind of like caring for my body, like my water in the morning, my supplements, all of that feels very supportive to me.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So you brought this up already. It's like every bucket just kind of flows into the next one. And you brought up that you and your husband saw a therapist together. So one of the buckets that you brought up on these things that help or some considerations for healing post miscarriage was, attending to your relationship and your marriage. So talk to us about what that looks like to go through something with someone. It's kind of better and worse, maybe sometimes. I don't know what it is, but talk to me about what happened there. I know you went to therapy together, but like what led up to that? Because at first you went to therapy alone.
Yep.
Like what was he going through or his emotions? Was he shoving those? Was he dealing with them? How did it affect your relationship? All those things.
So number 1, we grieve very differently. And I think this is true of like every relationship. And this is the most important thing to know is like, the way that you process grief, you get through grief is so different. The way you show support is very different. The way you want support is very different. And so trying to have a conversation about those things is so, so important. And for us, like having an outside person to help facilitate those conversations and even just like point out that was happening. So when you're in it, you're like, well, why is he not coming up to give me a hug? Well, he's giving me space because that's what he wants, And so really working through and figuring out how you can best support each other. And at the same time, acknowledging like, oh yeah, they are showing support in their own way. Like maybe him doing that is because like thinks that's, what you want. And so just really like having an open dialogue there. So that's one piece of it. And then the other part of it is, what do you want moving forward? And that's where I've seen too with Miscarriage Hope Desk is sometimes people are really split on that. For us, we did have the foundation of, we both wanted a family. And I didn't mention this, but before we even got married, we did talk that like we were open to adoption, not really for fertility issues, but just like we thought that might be in our future. But we both like were very certain and unwavering in like wanting a family. So neither of us ever, I mean, I'm sure like in the height of it, I was like, oh, I'm done. But like I was never giving up on having a family, and neither was he. So that was like this thing that we came back to is like, what's our commonality? And of course, like, you've got your love for each other. So that's something you can go back to as well. And that piece of it. But, really coming back to that, because there are times where I wanted to go and do this and he wanted to do that. And like, that's really hard to have that conversation, like when you bring up a topic like adoption or IVF. And with both of those, we were not 100% in alignment all the time on what path we wanted to take. And those are really, really hard conversations to have, especially when you're going through grief at the same time. So I just like to point that out a lot through my work with Miscarriage Hope Desk, that like, if you and your partner are struggling through this, it is hard. It's a very hard thing to go through. But now I do think, parenting can have its challenges, and it's really helped us form a bond that we didn't otherwise have.
What I hear from the way you describe this is that you understood kind of each other's personalities and how you manifested. Do you think you knew that before, or that was something you started to uncover through that? Because that could be a place for contention or for understanding. And we have a choice there. And that's kind of why I'm like mildly obsessed with personality types, because when you read them and they feel like they're reading your mind, and then you look at like your partners. I mean, I was like first depressed when I saw my husband's Enneagram number. And then I was like, okay, now I understand you a little better. Like, dang it. Anyway, so it's not what I fully expect. It wasn't where I was pigeonholing it, what you're not supposed to do. And so my point is what I take from it is that I understand that person better. And if you can understand them better when they're in a healthy place or an unhealthy place or whatever, it gives more empathy. And empathy is like, is the opposite of anger, I think. So I'm just wondering if you kind of understood how he dealt with things beforehand. I would presume not. Like, when did that unravel?
No, I probably thought, like, if you would have asked me, I maybe would beforehand, I maybe would have said, sure, I know that. But no, like we learned so much more about each other. And I mean, I think we learned, so much more about ourselves too. Like there are ways that I went through it that I didn't even know about myself until I got into it, like it really brought out, brings out parts of yourself are kind of surprising and not maybe your favorite parts either, right? As you're going through it. So we got to discover all of that together.
And do you think you would have been able to discover it? Like, did you go to therapy and did it help you unravel that? Or were you guys able to kind of navigate? What do you think if you were talking to someone and their husband wouldn't go to therapy with them, but they do need to make some, like, there is a struggle there? Like, what would you say? Here's something to consider when you're trying to, like, here's how to help understand yourself. Like, because there's a self-awareness issue sometimes. It's like, maybe your husband didn't know that him kind of secluding himself was his own way of dealing with it. Like at first, like he didn't even realize it because maybe that was just how he was, right? You didn't even know.
Yeah.
What would you say to that person who's really struggling with that piece?
Yeah. So I actually, and I am by no means like a therapist or anything, but I created a checklist. So we have a moving forward program, but I think I gave it out to my email list like on Valentine's Day, but it's this checklist of, okay, how do I show support and how do I want support to be given to me? And it's like pretty like long of like, bringing me breakfast in bed or giving me a hug or giving me space, like all the different things, like buying me flowers, writing a card, just all of these things that you can have in like that checklist. And then you can get together with your partner and have that conversation of like, how are you showing support? How do you want to receive support? But also having those conversations. So that conversation and the like, what steps are we going to do moving forward? Those conversations need to be had like Saturday morning when you're in a good mood, right? Like they shouldn't be had like when you're at the end of the day and like in the middle of an argument, So also figuring out the best timing for conversations like that. But yeah, I think it's totally, and I know like I am very grateful that my husband was open to going to therapy because I know some are not. And I will say though, a lot of therapy, even if he's there, it's really working on you. So as much as you feel like, oh, we need to go to therapy together so he can work on himself, like it's you need to work on you. I promise you, like you're half of the relationship. So just you going to therapy is still going to help the relationship, even if he's not open to it. And, maybe over time he recognizes that and then maybe he's open to it or something.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Because we always want to deflect things, but
yes,
I have to hold up a mirror. It's really annoying.
Yeah. I still have to catch myself on that one. So,
oh, man. Okay. A bit of a review where we've been and what's left here. So when we're talking about the things that might need addressing post miscarriage, talked about testing and lab work. And I think the valuable thing I took away there is you said, take control and ask why something isn't tested, essentially. Yes. And then there's the checklist on the site. And then we talked about physical healing. And what I heard there is like, really get quiet and listen, try not to fill the emptiness, which is like good advice for everyone. Good advice for everyone is that in quiet and in space is when the best stuff comes to the top, really. And from there, we talked about emotional healing, and something valuable you said there was that if it makes you happier and healthier, do it anyway, because that's really like your ultimate goal probably in life. That's going to help lead to potentially a pregnancy, or like it's our ultimate goal anyway. Like we always we're like, I'll be happy if, and we have to catch ourselves from continuing to say that. So if we can do something, like we have to say, what can I do today to make myself happy today? And some of the things you did on a daily basis that did not rely on going outside of yourself was journaling and prompts, guided prompts, walks and silence, meditation, taking care of your body. And then also like realizing that community was important, or like developing your own community was a potential step there as well. Then we talked about your marriage and relationship. And so I think the thing that's valuable there is, how do you want to be supported and how do you like to show support? Yes, I think that was correct. And then also like just getting help on yourself is going to help the relationship, not like focusing on the other person, but changing yourself first, which is a good reminder for all of us. I think that's like most of the buckets, except for the wild card bucket. Essentially, like whatever else you want to add. You've talked about adding acupuncture, which we kind of put under the physical bucket, healthy eating under the physical bucket. But like the list could be long. What are some of the other potential things that one could do if they wanted to, had the space that felt like right to them post miscarriage?
Oh man. I mean, I think any sort of healing modality, and the thing I've started to realize is with a lot of the like kind of healing or energy work, if you want to get into some of that, is there is a lot of overlap in a lot of them. And I think for me, it's finding the right practitioner and someone that you connect with and that resonates with you, right? So it's maybe not so important that you go to this kind of energy healer, or you do this thing, but if you find that right practitioner that really feels like they are understanding you and supporting you, then like kind of gravitate towards that. I mean, that being said, there are some modalities, like I know acupuncture, there is research. Like when I've done the research, there is research that acupuncture can help with fertility. There's a little bit of research into like chiropractic work. There's something I did that was like Mayan abdominal massage that can help as well. Another thing, always, of course, checking with your doctor. There are some things that like if you happen to be pregnant, you may not want to be doing like if you're actually pregnant. So just kind of figuring out what's right for you. And a lot of it too, it's like anything when you're looking at your protocol and your supplements and your diet, all of that stuff is going to be unique to you. So the thing I really like to caution people is like, don't get into a Facebook group and see that like this lady got pregnant because she did X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Your lab work, like your unique person is so different from that person. So you just can't do it that way. You've really got to look at your situation and see what is the best fit for you. And that's finding, the right doctor that can really understand your labs. And then again, listening to that intuition and knowing what's right for you. And ultimately, listening in to what you are saying, and that will serve you very well as you transition into motherhood, as well as learning to listen to yourself and trust yourself.
Such sound advice. And actually getting into a Facebook group and and like looking at their success protocol and applying it to yourself, again, might be bad advice for any condition as well. So great to bring up right here, because I'm guessing you've seen it a couple of times.
Yes. And if you want to see the research behind their protocol, I am on a mission to have all of those articles so you can do the research yourself before you start popping random pills and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Allison, where can people find you online or get support from Miscarriage Hope Desk?
So it's just miscarriagehopedesk.com. We have an active Instagram account that's at Miscarriage Hope Desk. We have a Facebook group. Again, everything, to search Miscarriage Hope Desk. We have a podcast as well. And those interviews are also on YouTube. I think that's where we are. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, it's just miscarriagehopedesk.com/newsletter. And when you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get a free copy of that lab checklist that we talked about earlier.
Cool. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
When trying to conceive and grow a small human or nourish yourself through some of the tough stuff our bodies have to deal with day to day, a high-quality prenatal is your first insurance policy. Unlike the majority of prenatal supplements, Fullwell Prenatal exceeds current safety standards by independent testing for heavy metals, allergens, and other contaminants on every single batch produced, which is absolutely the exception in the supplement industry. Longtime private practice functional medicine dietitian and mother, Fullwell Prenatal creator Ayla Barmer has a deep knowledge on the needs and challenges of women before, during, and after pregnancy. You can feel confident in the year she spent curating the best forms of nutrients for Fullwell in dosages that actually align with research in a gentle, easy-to-use formula that doesn't upset your stomach. Check out the new website at fullwellfertility.com and use the code LESSSTRESS to get a discount on your order. Sharing and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help us succeed with our mission to help integrate the best of East and West and empower you to raise the bar on your health story. Just go to reviewthispodcast.com/less-stressed-life. That's reviewthispodcast.com/less-stressed-life, and you'll be taken directly to a page where you can insert your review and hit post.